This focus gets into more detail with what we saw in Unit 2 of Section 3, titled Ecomuseums and Local Development. The focus gives us the possibility to jump into a practical case study and understand how an ecomuseum can contribute to the development and enhancing of a sustainable tourism destination, especially if it is located in a peripheral area. The topics we will treat in this focus are the following: definition of an ecomuseum and its difference with a museum and an ethnographic museum, its role in place development and promotion, the case of the ecomuseum Lis Aganis, practical examples, tools and challenges, working within 4 peripheral areas and with local community, which is not a homogeneous and static reality. Touching these 2 points, we will understand if working on peripheral areas is more challenging, and if yes, why. Finally, we will also consider the important role and contribution of local micro, small and medium-sized enterprises in enhancing local development and how they collaborate with the ecomuseum. To treat these topics, we invited Deborah Del Basso, director of the ecomuseum Lis Aganis, which is located in Friuli region, Italy. Deborah Del Basso is an expert in the creation, planning and coordination of the Lis Aganis Ecomuseum from its birth, dated 2003, to the first years of activity. She participated in the working group that defined the regional law on ecomuseums in Italy. In collaboration with the University of Udine, she plans courses for ecomuseum operators and supports university students in the drafting of various degree theses on the topics of local development, cultural heritage, and ecomuseums. She is member of the Scientific Technical Committee of Ecomuseum Lis Aganis. She also participated as invited member to multiple meetings at national level dedicated to ecomuseum and cultural heritage. She contributed to the drafting of the Charter of Catania, representing the Friuli Venezia Giulia region, Italy. Since October 2023, she is the director of the ecomuseum Lis Aganis. Enjoy the interview. In Section 3 of our course, we are treating the topic of locals' involvement in place representation and promotion. Within the local stakeholders, a key subject when present is for sure an ecomuseum. To get into more detail with this interesting subject, we invited Deborah Del Basso, director of the ecomuseum Lis Aganis, which is located in Italy in Friuli region. Welcome, Deborah, to the INCULTUM project.
Thank you, Laura. It's a pleasure.
Let's start with the word ecomuseum. What does it stand for?
The term ecomuseum was used for the first time in 1971 in France. In the 1970s, the ICOM, International Council of Museums, declared that the museum should connect to the environment and the territory, moving from a concept of temple museum to a concept of forum museum. That means the museum outside the museum. Since the 1980s, new trends emerged. Ecomuseums are intended an instrument for community development. In fact, ecomuseums are an emanation of the community. In short, the local community is not only audience, but also actor within the ecomuseum. Today, ecomuseums are a process, cultural institution, and very important local actors.
And I'm still curious about what it is and what it does. So that's the second question for you. What's the difference between an ecomuseum, a museum, and an ethnographic museum in enhancing local heritage? Do they work in a different way with the local community?
An ecomuseum is a circular process of study, analysis, reading, interpretation, and reinterpretation local cultural heritage. The distinctive element of an ecomuseum is the role it gives to the community. All members of the community can be active parts in this process, while the territory, the landscape, the social, cultural, and economic topics are the background of this process. The ecomuseum can tell a different story every time, because it is the people who speak for it, and not the guide. It is a museum outside its walls, providing itineraries, visits of small villages and artisan workshops, but also laboratories, activities, and situated teaching. On the contrary, a traditional museum shows a selected collection, a building, and it is addressed to an audience. Finally, the ethnographic museums tell the story of the community, but remaining on the past, on the as we once were.
I'm still curious on the difference between ecomuseums and the other types of museums, and that's why I'm coming to the third question. We know that museums in general have changed very much in the way they operate in cultural industry and in engaging visitors. Are ecomuseums, museums, and ethnographic museums still so different from each other?
Good questions. If until few years ago the distinction between these types of museums was clear, today they increasingly share topics like participation and sustainability, new technologies and new target audiences. They also have common elements like conservation of heritage, the presence of a manager or custodian, the intent to preserve the memory. But important differences still remain. Museums are generally born within a clear regulatory framework. Ethnographic museums are an important center of culture. As for ecomuseum, culture is not understood as a static, aesthetic, or sector sense, but is a dynamic element of social and economic life of a territory.
You've just said that an ecomuseum is a dynamic element of the social and economic life of a territory, if I understood well. This is a key point also for our course, which is on how to enhance and promote peripheral areas as a tourist destination. So that's why I ask you, Deborah, why can an ecomuseum play a key role in place development and promotion?
From my point of view, an ecomuseum can have an important role in local development as a continuous process of dynamic reading and re-elaboration of the social cultural conditions in that territory. The action of the ecomuseum starts from the cultural roots of a place, but must also be able to read what is happening today, also imagining, where possible, what will be in the future. The foundations for participatory local development are the same as for an ecomuseum: the territory, the community, participation. Current design systems are based on dynamic processes, and what is this is not a work of reading, interpretation, and reinterpretation of the local heritage.
You're right, Deborah, but I still wonder how this can be translated in concrete. So now I would like to know something about your ecomuseum. Can you tell us its story, for example, and where does its name come from? Just to start with the description. But above all, how does this ecomuseum work with and for the local community?
The Agane are legendary women linked to water. They can be good or bad, also depending on human behavior. Our Agana one day met a woman who was so poor that she had nothing to raise her child. The Agana gave her a red bowl of gold that never ended, and thanks to that, the woman could survive take care of her child. For us, this Red Bull is the symbol of cooperation, of the past that is linked to the future. Lis Aganis was born on the impulse of a dedicated funding program for the development of rural areas. The Montagna Leader Local Action Group implemented the project by recognizing the ecomuseum as the right tool to promote the cultural, social and economic sustainability of the area. The consequence was the municipalities and associations worked together with the local action group to set up the ecomuseum.
That's really interesting, Deborah. Can you tell us something more on that?
In August 2004, the no-profit association was established. 3 topics were identified to enhance the local heritage: water, stones and crafts. The first ecomuseum sites were called themselves, and itineraries were identified as well. 20 years later, the ecomuseum Lis Aganis is still a point of reference for cultural activities and sustainable tourism in Friuli region. Dialogue and flexibility characterize the way we work with private and public bodies. Today, our members are 26 public subjects, 5 schools and many associations. We also co-plan and implemented ideas in an integrated and coordinated way with other local subjects, involving professionals, local expertise, scholars, and young people who work in the cultural and tourism sectors. Finally, we support the offices of small municipalities in planning and implementing cultural projects.
A really huge work, Deborah, that you did and still do to set up this important reality and to enlarge progressively the network of collaborations for the benefit of the territory. Congrats, really, really impressive. You know that INCULTUM is a project dedicated to peripheral areas and their heritage. In your experience, in your daily life, do you think that working with and for peripheral areas is more challenging?
The area in which our ecomuseum Lis Aganis operates includes 23 municipalities and is divided into 2 areas, a plain area and an area with mountains and valleys. In the 2 areas, the difference is very clear in terms of number of residents, presence of primary services, schools, transport, healthcare. The exodus, especially of younger families, not only puts at risk the preservation of the memory of places or communities, but risks compromising the future of these values. In Friuli region, some of these small villages are attractive artists or people who can work remotely. Some families are moving from urban areas, but for the moment they are rare cases. I believe that sustainable tourism could be an instrument to revitalize peripheral areas and create job opportunities. But we know these processes require long-term vision and investments.
It takes time, true. And probably today it's even more complicated due to the fact that people come and go, changing territory and moving elsewhere for diverse reasons. What does it mean in concrete for you and today work with local community? Who are they? How can they contribute to the activity of the ecomuseum?
The local community is central to our ecomuseum. But today there are many and different communities that live in a territory. The exodus of young locals, the arrival of new temporary residents, including tourists, the existence of virtual communities that connect from far and very different places. They are all elements that determine a continuous contaminations. The ecomuseum potentially gives voice to all components of the community. It can spread of the traditions, the history, and the past of this place. But it can also provide a contemporary reinterpretation of the territory which is about today and now. I like to think an ecomuseum is a mirror on the community that has been, but also as the mirror on the community that is today.
An effective image, that of the mirror, Deborah. I'm learning a lot from you and from ecomuseums, your experience especially. Thank you very much. I would like to ask you many other questions, but I know that our time is nearly at the end. So that's why I run to the last question, which is about our Italian context. We know that Italy is characterized by micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. Which role do they play in enhancing local development and with respect to the ecomuseum activity?
Our community, especially in the villages of the internal areas, includes a variety of small artisans, farmers, and producers. They produce mosaic, wood products, agri-food products, or services like typical restaurants. They are surely cultural products because they bring together traditional knowledge with new techniques of conservation, design, and marketing. Collaborating with them is particularly important for us because they strengthen the relationship between the cultural component and the economic component of the territory. On some moments, they host cultural events, workshops, educational site inspection. They are examples of we can save tradition and at the same time increase form of small local economies.
Unfortunately, Deborah, we are at the end of this enriching, really enriching conversation. I thank you very much for sharing your experience with us. All the best for your activity and the Ecomuseum Lis Aganis.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, and we wait for you in Friuli at the Ecomuseum Lis Aganis.
Thank you, Deborah. Bye. Ciao.
Bye.